Okay, yeah, what I'd like to do, if we are amenable to it, because I have the feeling that our questions might go into wanting to start to work on the language, but I'm happy to have council members, if you have specific questions of clarity, maybe we could at least limit that now, and then we can allow the public to weigh in, and then we can come back for additional questions and comments, because I have a feeling with this language, all the language we've looked at. And then Lee, I guess I would request that as we start to get closer, if you could maybe put that language up just so that we can look at it live. It's pretty hard to see in the PowerPoint. So I will go with council questions. Council member, I believe Kalantari Johnson was first, but I'm not sure because I have been managing different things coming my way. So I'll call Councilmember Kalantari Johnson, Councilmember Cummings, Councilmember Golder, Councilmember Watkins, and then Vice Mayor Bruner. And again, if you just keep the questions sort of to specifics and try to, so please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a number of them, so I'm trying to organize them in my head. But the first one is if you can clarify around, Lee, this is a question for Lee, the piece around allowing for members of the family unit or caregivers to remain during daytime hours. And then there was a piece around 96 hours. It was moving really fast, so I wanted to understand where that fits and what that exactly means.
Sure, thanks for that, and sorry I was moving fast there.
Sure.
So the provision, and I'll pull this back up here so that you all can see it. So the council will recall that we had included a section that allows for individuals with a qualifying disability to remain in a location for 96 hours. And let me just first ask, can you all see the screen okay here? Should I enlarge it?
I can see it.
Yeah, better.
Okay, great. What we did is we added, so that was already in there, and it said that individuals with a qualifying disability can remain in a location for 96 hours, and they don't have to move between the 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And we subsequently heard from individuals who said, what about families? That could be really challenging for a family with young children who is having to move. And so we said, hey, that should be, that's a fair comment. That should be something we'll put out there for consideration. And I just want to be very clear that, all of these things are for the council's consideration. And, we kind of picked things from the many comments that were received to say, hey, council may want to weigh in on this. So this adds both the families with one or more children under 18, as well as the single caregiver. Before, if there were two people, a person with a qualifying disability, what we heard from a commenter was that many times people with disabilities actually have someone who is caring for them that lives with them. And we said, okay, well, let's put that out there for the council to consider. Maybe that individual will also be exempted.
Okay, thank you. My next question is also for you, Lee, around the storage program. Has staff considered where the locations of storage program would be and how individuals would access the storage program, and sort of connected to that, if we would be, if the transportation piece has been considered?
So we have had some very initial brainstorming sessions surrounding this. We have not identified specific locations. We've brainstormed potential locations, but we haven't said, yes, it would be here. We've said, where is it going to be convenient? and where is it going to be most likely to be utilized. And I think what we would be looking to do is maximize the utilization, and if we're finding that a specific location isn't being utilized, asking individuals why it's not being utilized and seeing, all right, well, where can we move this such that it is more readily utilized? So, I think we still have a lot of work to do in that respect. We want to make sure that that is in place before we are enforcing any of the daytime camping restrictions. And so that was one of the reasons why the ordinance came to you as it was we would not necessarily have that storage program up and running right away.
And how about the transportation piece?
So that would be dependent on where that actually occurs. We've talked about, should it be multiple places in close proximity to the locations where campers are? Ideally, that would be the case. If that can't happen, then we may need to organize some transportation. But I will say, our initial brainstorming session was, where is this going to be conveniently located such that people can access it without needing transportation? But that's still to be determined.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My next question for clarity is for Chief Mills and Mayor Myers. If this is more than a question for clarity, we can hold it off until the deliberations. But it's around the enforcement piece and the warning piece. And if there is consideration of integrating outreach and engagement as part of that warning effort.
Well, we certainly would welcome the county or any other NGO or social service agency to assist with reaching out to people who are challenged and outside to enable them to access services and resources. So that would be a positive step that we could certainly utilize. We currently do not have that resource other than our mental health liaisons who do a fabulous job, but they're mostly focused on just mental health, even though there's a significant overlap. But we would certainly welcome that if the county decided to give us extra people, or we find a grant or something else that we could hire those bodies with.
Thank you. And then my last piece is, I think you were saying that this piece around the 8 a.m., 8 p.m., I don't know if it was you or Lee, is really to, in some ways, manage the growing encampments and the large number of tents. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit as that being a tool from keeping large encampments from popping up.
Yeah, so I view it as a way to manage the entrenchment. And once people get entrenched, they tend to grow in numbers. We have seen that in multiple places around the city. So if people can't get entrenched because they have to pick up their property every day, it's harder to collect more and more pieces of property. For instance, when people leave stuff out on the curbs, that winds up oftentimes in our homeless camps. And so building that collection of things and entrenching themselves in those locations, that's what becomes difficult, that's what becomes costly, and that becomes very difficult to undo for us. So by having them lower their tents every day, packing it up, storing it, and then going out to whether it's appointments for medical or jobs, that would be the opportunity for them to store that property and then avoid any conflict with the rest of the city staff.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Donnie, you're muted.
Councilmember Cummings is next, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, staff, for the presentation. I have a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to try to we're going to try to not repeat the same ones for now. And I just want to, make sure it's clear to the public that, I think there's a lot of areas of alignment, and I totally understand why this is important because, we really need to try to keep people from camping in some of our very environmentally very sensitive areas. Also, the fact that we need to mitigate some of the behaviors that are negatively impacting neighborhoods, and to the point of, trying to keep these large encampments from getting entrenched. I think that is something that it's really important that we try to focus on. And at the same time, figure out, what are some compassionate solutions to homelessness and to providing opportunities for people who are experiencing homelessness. But, overall, the sense that I get is a big part of this is trying to mitigate some of the negative environmental impacts and the negative interactions between community members and people who are experiencing homelessness, or housed and unhoused, I should say. But at the same time, there's a lot of concerns. And I, out of curiosity, am just wanting to understand really how this came forward, because this item last year came before us as part of a quality of life ordinance package where there were 7 ordinances that were being proposed for the council to consider. Because of the pandemic and because of COVID-19, work was stopped on these ordinances, in part because the CDC was saying, we don't need to disturb encampments. If there are people who are experiencing homelessness, they need to stay where they are to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and not have these people get impacted. And so, given that, although there is a light at the end of the tunnel, we're not out of the pandemic yet. And so I'm just wanting to understand, why this is coming to us now, because it also seems like there's a lot of factors that are going to inhibit us from enforcing this and for this to actually be implemented. And I don't think we should be providing this false sense of, security to the public that, if this gets passed, that we're going to start putting something through it and enforcing anytime soon, because there's a lot of restrictions that will prevent us from doing this. So I don't know if it's council members or staff who may want to comment on this coming forward, but I think it would be good to get some clarity around, why now for this ordinance.
Martine, Bernal, I don't know if you would like to take a shot at that.
Yes, I'd be happy to try to answer that. I think it's a combination of factors. One was there was previous direction about a year ago when the council considered the cash recommendations, and one of those was to amend our ordinance to comply with Martin versus Boise. Another was the fact that we have a multitude of, as you saw in the presentation, of complaints and just a need to respond to the ongoing situation. And then I think others were interest on the part of council members to try to bring something forward. So I think it was a variety of reasons. Again, both a combination of council direction, the need to try to address situations and conditions on the ground, and interest of council members to bring something forward.
If I could,
and I'd like to just make sure that just during this time, because we have 150 people waiting, I'd like to just try to make questions very clarifying in nature right now. I think we will be deliberating for quite some time on some of these other, but if there's maybe clarifying questions on the ordinance, that would be helpful just in this point in time.
I mean, that was helpful for just kind of for me to understand, how this came about, given that there was 7 quality of life ordinance recommendations. So that was helpful. I would say that, one, if we're going to talk about the ordinance in and of itself, I would like to understand, we're not out of the pandemic, and we just found ourselves in a lawsuit because there was an attempt to try to clear the homeless encampment at San Lorenzo. And so I'm just wondering if this ordinance were to move forward, it seems like we might find ourselves in additional legal, troubles with telling people that they can't set up their tents during the daytime. And so I'm just trying to understand, under the current laws, how this ordinance, whether or not this ordinance would put us into legal trouble.
I'm not clear. I was hoping to get questions on the ordinance right now, the contents of the ordinance. I'll look to Mr. Condotti I'm just trying to get questions on the ordinance contents, but and I understand there's a lot of deliberation types of comments and questions people have, but I'll look to Mr. Condotti. I'm not sure if
well, I think the answer to
the legality of something we haven't even adopted yet, or I'm not quite clear on how we manage this particular question.
I think the answer to Councilmember Cummings' question is yes, but in the context of there is a significant deal of uncertainty in these issues. The Martin versus Boise decision was not a model of clarity. It did suggest some reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions that would be permissible in lieu of a citywide ban on camping, and that's what has been prepared for the council's consideration tonight. Did we hit the mark perfectly? Probably not, but this is a good faith effort to draft an ordinance that tries to strike a balance between a lot of competing and compelling interests in a way that that we believe is intended to be consistent with the decision in Martin versus Boise and other cases that have interpreted it since.
Thank you, Mr. Condotti.
I guess along those lines, I saw within the ordinance that under 6.36.040D that it says that this wouldn't be enforced until homeless and unsheltered have access to vaccines. However, we're being sued currently because we tried to remove an encampment, and the CDC has outlined that we are not to disrupt encampments during the pandemic. So I'm concerned with that language that's in the ordinance as to whether or not that will stand up in court. Because if we get sued because we're trying to move people who are camping, and our excuse for doing so is that, well, there's enough vaccines, but yet that's still in violation of the CDC. I'm wondering, how we'll reconcile that, because I do feel that I have a lot of concerns with what's before us, all the changes that have been made that we haven't had a chance to look at, and some of the provisions within this that I think and I believe that people in our community will sue us over, and we are in a financial deficit. We try to avoid lawsuits under certain circumstances, and I think this is one of the ones where we absolutely need to be trying to avoid this, since we're already being sued for trying to disrupt homeless encampments. So it'd be good to understand this situation as well, since it's written into the ordinance.
Yeah, so you're right that the CDC guidance is to not dismantle encampments to avoid the risk of the spread of COVID-19, but we're not operating per se under the CDC guidance. We are operating under a federal district court judge's order that, among other reasons, concluded that a preliminary injunction should be granted to bar the city from dismantling the San Lorenzo Park encampment at this time. And I don't think there's any intention of moving forward in contravention of the district court judge's order. And so that is an ongoing discussion that will be had in court, and unless and until the judge provides the city with a viable mechanism for dismantling these encampments, we cannot do so. So I'm not concerned about the city being in violation of the district court judge's order in this case, because we intend to comply with it.
I'll hold off on the rest of my comments until later.
Councilmember Golder? No questions? Councilmember Watkins?
I'm going to reserve my questions for later.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Brunner.
Okay, my clarifying ordinance questions are the first one being on private property, 6.36.030, A1. Would that be Tony Condati? With consent of owner or occupant, shouldn't it be both, or how does that work?
It could be both. This is reflective of existing text. So the council certainly has the ability to modify that as part of this. We made very few changes to that section, but it's within the council's purview to make that modification should you see fit.
Okay. My next question was on that same section A3. Can you speak to the number of vehicles and where that context comes from in terms of not being site specific? For example, some sites may be larger to maybe accommodate 4 vehicles. Another site might be smaller to accommodate less vehicles. Where does that number come from?
Sure. So this is where, and for members of the public who are listening, this is related to allowing for RVs inside, so allowing for camping inside a licensed and registered motor vehicle in the parking lot on the site of a business institution in a non-residential district with the written consent of both the business institution and property owner, with some various other provisions. So currently that's allowed at 2. We included an increase of that to 3. Now, the council certainly can increase that to a greater number, that, or you could provide some direction and tell us, come up with an idea of how that relates to, you could say, for example, no fewer than 3, but it could be 1/5 of the parking spaces up to a maximum of 8. So it's certainly within your purview this evening to make some modifications related to that, should you see fit.
And Vice Mayor Brunner, I might just for the public in case, so we're discussing section 6.36.030 private property, just so that everyone's clear. That's the section, right?
Correct. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. My next, I'm moving to the next section. I'll try and be.
No worries at all. No, you're
okay. 6.36.040. Let's see. A3. Have these areas already been identified? Was one of the questions. I'm pulling that up.
Sure. So
if it helps to read it.
Yeah, I've got it right here in front of me.
Okay.
And in fact, if it's helpful, I could share my screen so members of the public can see.
Maybe that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this is again in the at-risk areas and areas where camping would be prohibited. And Vice Mayor Brunner was asking about subsection 3 here and whether or not these areas of reasonably foreseeable danger to occupants and first responders and special status species have been identified. And somewhat. So I'll clarify for you. I am going to pull up some maps here to assist with this. And I will share my screen again here. Let's do this.
Yep, you got it. You got it, Liz? Lee? Yeah.
Okay. So The prohibited areas have been identified here. I'll make this larger. Prohibited areas have been identified. And then when we start looking at the additional areas, the areas that are potentially of danger, the hatched areas here, this is all the wildland-urban interface, and our fire chief would actually determine which areas and specific portions of those areas would be off limits during certain times of the year. You know, an area might be fine to camp in right now, but come late August, the fire chief could say, hey, you know, it's really dry and the fire risk is too high. Similarly, there are flood areas, again, during the winter, maybe some of those areas are off limits. And then the sensitive species areas or sensitive habitat areas, we would need to do a further analysis of those areas and identify whether or not those areas could accommodate campers. And it could vary throughout the year, you know, so if there's a migratory species, for example, perhaps camping is allowed there when that migratory species is not there. But when it is expected to be present, the camping could be prohibited. So I don't have a clear yes and no answer for you. It is.
Is there only the map form, or is there a list form, or?
So what we would do
at this point, yeah.
Yeah. So right now, all we've got is the maps that are there. Now, what we would do is the ordinance actually requires us to maintain a website and keep that current with respect to the areas that are prohibited. So if the fire chief comes in and says, hey, this WUI area is, that wildland urban interface area is off limits right now, then we would update that map and say, our fire chief has said this is off limits. And same thing would happen with the sensitive species. We would need to specifically identify those areas in advance of the ordinance being enforced.
Okay. My next question is the same section A4. Where is the interior side and the inward side? And would there be signage? Is that?
So that is essentially between, so this is the San Lorenzo River, and maybe I think I can explain this one without pulling that up. That's the San Lorenzo River path, and it's in between the two trails. So on either side of the river, so the inward side of that. And there are a number of signs out there, and we can look at that. Again, we want to make sure that it's clear for everyone. For those who are looking for a place to sleep, that they have a good understanding, as well as the community members who are wondering where folks may or may not be allowed.
Okay. My next question, there's no A6, it skips from A5 to A7.
Sorry, typo.
Okay.
We've gone through a lot of versions of this as we're
okay.
compromising.
Where is there a list of city-owned beaches?
So the Parks and Master Plan actually identifies the city-owned beaches, and I can pull that up here. The city beaches include Mitchell's Cove, It's Beach, which is Dog Beach, Cowles Beach, and Main Beach.
Okay.
It does not include the Natural Bridges or Seabright. Those are state-owned beaches, and for state-owned, as we identified in the agenda report, for state-owned properties, if they're conducting state-owned business, the city has limited land use authority over them, and so we have explicitly limited this to the city-owned beaches.
But I think it's important to note, Lee, that the California State Parks does not allow camping on any of those sites.
Thank you.
Okay, same section A11. It states within the boundary of the city's downtown plan. Can you talk about that boundary in relation to the BID, the BID district, to the Business Improvement District?
So I don't know the exact boundaries of the Business Improvement District off the top of my head, but I think probably the easiest way to call this out is to just pull up the map, and it's going to be
Is it different, or is, and I guess that's my question. Are there differences?
So there are differences, and some of those we captured as part of the language here. In that, the downtown plan actually covers a little bit east of the river and a little bit north of water, and in some of those areas we excluded as part of this text. Let me open up. I'm going to open up here. I'll just.
Councilmember or Vice Mayor Bruner, how many more questions do you have? I'm just curious.
I have 4 more questions.
Okay.
I'm going to open the map here, and that will give you an idea from the downtown perspective, and I'll zoom in on that. So this will give you an idea. Again, it's at a fairly large scale, but zooming in, you can get a good idea. So water on the north side, capturing down to basically over to City Hall, and then down around down, that would be Center, and then looping over to Cedar, and then over to the river, essentially, and then including parks. So you've got, San Lorenzo Park over here as a park that would be excluded.
Okay, thank you. Section 6.36.060, B, and that is the section for additional criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Where are gray water dumping sites currently?
So I believe the closest one is at the corner of Soquel and Highway 1 at I think it's a 76 station right there. There's a gas station off the northeast corner of Highway 1 and Soquel. Right back there near, like on the side, across from the hospital on the side where Toys R Us used to be. That gas station right there, I believe, is the closest one. Yeah. I will also say that the city has been working on looking into whether or not an additional one can be provided locally as a resource for individuals who are living in RVs. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to bring something else online that's more convenient, because we recognize that is, it's not super far away, but it is also a burden to drive all the way across town, particularly if you've got a limited amount of funds.
Okay. And then in that same section, F, what is the definition of unreasonable amount of litter?
So that was a good question. That was one of the areas where we had community comments come in, and we're actually recommending removing the unreasonable amount of litter and just saying free from litter and debris. And again, we're putting this out as a recommendation for the council to consider. We thought that was good language, but this is all up to the council's purview.
Okay, and so that brings me to some of the ordinances that we currently have and address the disruptive and criminal behavior and activity already. And so in terms of the litter and debris and all of that, we have that currently. We have possession of stolen property. We currently have illegal drugs, intoxicated in public, open container, urinating in public, sidewalk obstruction laws. I'm trying to understand why it would need to be additional in addition to when.
Bruner, go ahead. Sorry. I was just wondering if maybe that might fall into the deliberation section, because I think maybe many council members might, and I'm just trying to, is that a deliberation type of question, Tony, that we could get into with much more discussion versus just sort of answering specific questions at this time?
I can take a brief crack at it.
Go for it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mayor.
Yes.
Okay.
And the Chief Mills has discussed this on multiple occasions, that in order to cite someone for littering, you either have to observe them throwing a piece of litter on the ground or have a witness to that sign a citizen's arrest complaint. And this ordinance specifically addresses maintaining an encampment with those conditions present. So there's a distinction. You're right. We have some tools to deal with these types of sort of nuisance behaviors. But in the context of an encampment, they're difficult to enforce unless you actually observe the person, discarding needles, littering, relieving themselves at a location. So that's what this is intended to address.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, council members. And I'm sorry to be the time police, but I just want to make sure we can get as much public comment in as we can. So I will go ahead and start the public comment period. As I mentioned, there were 12 groups that requested. These are organizations that requested additional time, which I was able to provide each